There are moments in the history of entertainment that do more than just make headlines. They create a fracture in the very foundation of how we perceive our cultural icons. For decades, the name Ron Howard has stood as the ultimate symbol of stability, a steady hand in a volatile industry, and a man whose public image was as carefully constructed as one of his Academy Award-winning frames. We knew him as the innocent Opie Taylor, the dependable Richie Cunningham, and eventually the visionary director who could handle any crisis on a film set. But in 2025, that carefully guarded silence finally broke. The world watched in stunned disbelief as one of Hollywood's most resilient figures allowed the curtain to lift, revealing a man who was no longer interested in protecting the industry's secrets. This shift didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the result of a series of personal earthquakes that culminated in a tragedy so dark it sent shockwaves through the inner circles of the elite. The sudden and heartbreaking news surrounding the end of Rob Reiner's life was a blow that the film world was not prepared to process. Rob Reiner was more than just a contemporary to Ron Howard. He was a mirror. While Howard was the quiet, methodical architect of cinema, Reiner was the bold, outspoken force of nature. They were two towering figures who had navigated the same treacherous waters for over 50 years, surviving the transition from child stardom to directorial mastery. When the news broke that Rob and his wife, Michelle Singer, had lost their lives in a violent incident within the supposed safety of their Brentwood home, the illusion of Hollywood safety evaporated instantly. For Ron Howard, this wasn't just another industry loss. It was a confrontation with a reality that no script could fix and no amount of success could shield against. Standing at 71 years old with a legacy valued at over $200 million, Ron Howard has reached a point of radical honesty. He has begun to speak about a golden cage childhood, the crushing weight of perfectionism that led to his own physical collapse, and the deep-seated guilt of a father who realized too late that he had traded his children's milestones for box office hits. The passing of the Reiners served as a final brutal catalyst, forcing Howard to examine why so many of his peers carry their burdens in total isolation. He is now revealing a truth that many in the industry avoid saying out loud, that the pursuit of a legendary career often requires the sacrifice of one's own humanity. As he navigates the fear of losing his own brother, Clint Howard, to a debilitating illness, Ron's reflections have turned from professional achievements to the raw, unprotected truth of what it means to survive Hollywood. This is not a story about scandals or typical tabloid drama. It is an investigative look into the soul of a man who has seen the industry at its absolute best and its most unforgiving worst. Why did Ron Howard say he in part blames himself? What was the unspoken competition that existed beneath the surface of his relationship with Rob Reiner? Today we go beyond the awards and the accolades to explore the moments that made the film world pause in silence. This is the narrative of a man who spent his life telling the world's stories, only to realize in the wake of tragedy that he had almost forgotten how to tell his own. Moving into the next chapter of this journey, we must look back at the foundation of these two lives, because to understand why Ron Howard reacted so viscerally to the loss of Rob Reiner, one must understand the unique, high-pressure environment that forged them both. Ronald William Howard's life has never been separate from the lens of a camera, having been born into a world of imagination and intense structure in 1954. While most children were forming their first full sentences, Ron was already a working professional making his debut at just 18 months old. This was a childhood where script pages replaced storybooks and auditions took precedence over family dinners. Ron has since described this period as living inside a golden cage, a place that looked magical from the outside but felt incredibly isolating and structured on the inside. He was a child surrounded by adults performing for a nation that viewed him as a symbol of innocence, yet he was often disconnected from peers his own age. This environment created a specific type of psychological blueprint, the need for total discipline, and the suppression of personal desire for the sake of the production. Ron's father, Rance Howard, was a fiercely protective figure who demanded that his son never perform cute, but always perform truth. While this advice became the bedrock of Ron's creative integrity, it also reinforced the idea that his primary value lay in his ability to deliver a flawless performance. Behind the warmth and simplicity that viewers saw on their television screens, a 6-year-old boy was sitting in cramped studio rooms, finishing school assignments, while the crew waited for him to return to set. This early exposure to the unforgiving nature of the industry meant that Ron learned to project confidence and stability even when he was paralyzed by fear, such as the time he nearly broke down during the filming of The Music Man at age 8. Rob Reiner walked a remarkably similar path, though he did so with a much louder and more defiant spirit. Both men were second-generation Hollywood royalty, growing up under the shadows of successful parents and navigating the transition from being America's child to being a creative force in their own right. While Ron was the dependable Richie Cunningham trapped in a bubble of 1950s nostalgia during the social upheaval of the 1970s, Rob was challenging the status quo as the outspoken meathead on All in the Family. This shared history created an unspoken bond between them. They were survivors of a system that demanded emotional maturity far too early. Ron has admitted that he often looked at Rob's ability to be bold and political with a sense of quiet wonder, as he himself had been conditioned to be the safe and reliable professional. The weight of this upbringing left marks that never fully faded for Ron. He has openly acknowledged that those early years influenced how he viewed everyone navigating fame, especially someone like Rob, who seemed to carry the pressure of the industry with a different kind of intensity. They were two boys who grew up in the pressure cooker of the studio system, learning the rules of the game before they even knew who they were as individuals. As they aged, they became witnesses to one another's lives, watching from the sidelines, as they both sought to reclaim their identities by stepping behind the camera. For Ron, directing wasn't just a career move. It was a way to escape being shaped by characters that weren't truly his. It was a bid for survival and control. This deep shared understanding is why the sudden and chaotic end to Rob's life felt like a personal violation of the order Ron had worked so hard to maintain. As we move into the third act of this narrative, we explore a dynamic that was far more layered than the public ever realized. For decades, Ron Howard and Rob Reiner existed as two towering figures in the same space, often addressed as contemporaries, but rarely addressing each other directly in the public eye. This wasn't a feud in the traditional sense, but rather a complex history of shared space, unspoken competition, and a deep mutual awareness. They were both chasing the same thing: authenticity, excellence, and emotional truth. Yet their methods and personalities were polar opposites. Ron was the quiet, precise, and methodical worker, while Rob was bold, outspoken, and possessed a passion that often dominated any room he entered. Despite these differences, a profound respect existed between them, anchored in their indomitable knowledge of the craft. Ron often recalls a specific memory from the set of the film Ghosts of Mississippi, where he witnessed Rob's mastery firsthand. In the production van, Rob had a game where you would name an actor, the next person would name a film they were in, and the next would name the director of that film. Rob was a master of this, possessing an almost encyclopedic knowledge of cinema history. For Ron, who lived and breathed the industry since infancy, seeing that kind of kid in a candy store joy in a fellow director was something he deeply admired. He saw in Rob a man who genuinely loved the entire process of filmmaking and never seemed to lose his sense of humor or quick wit, even under the intense pressure of a major production. However, beneath this professional admiration lay the reality of two men navigating the same pressure cooker of Hollywood expectations. Both had transitioned from iconic child stars to high-stakes directors, a feat few achieve, and this created a silent understanding of the stakes involved. Ron has recently reflected on how heavy his tone became when discussing Rob after his passing, acknowledging that their relationship was defined as much by what was unsaid as what was spoken. They were witnesses to each other's survival in an industry that can be structured and demanding yet utterly unforgiving. While Ron was building an image of stability and reliability, he watched Rob live loudly, driven by a purpose and a belief that Ron often kept guarded within himself. This unspoken connection is why the revelations regarding Rob Reiner's end hit Ron with such force. It wasn't just the loss of a colleague, it was the loss of one of the few people who truly understood the cost of their shared journey. They had both spent their lives making the entire film world pause with their work. But now the silence was of a different kind. Ron began to realize that while they had been great acting partners and friends, the tension and competition that existed beneath the surface were symptoms of an industry that pits creatives against one another in a race for legacy. This realization has forced Ron to confront truths about Hollywood that many insiders avoid saying out loud, especially the idea that success can often be a mask for a much deeper, more personal struggle for identity. Moving into the fourth act of this journey, we must confront the physical and emotional price of a life dedicated to the pursuit of cinematic perfection. For Ron Howard, the transition from actor to director was not merely a change in title. It was an act of survival, a desperate attempt to reclaim a sense of agency after a childhood defined by the expectations of others. However, the very discipline that allowed him to escape the golden cage of acting soon became a new kind of prison. By the early 1990s, the world saw Ron as a major creative force, a reliable hitmaker who could deliver flawless results every single time. But behind that image of steady professionalism, the pressure was beginning to manifest in dangerous ways, leading to a moment that would change his perspective on the industry forever. The peak of this intensity arrived in 1995 with the production of Apollo 13. Ron's refusal to take shortcuts became an obsession. He wanted the film to be an exercise in absolute truth. This meant filming hundreds of zero-gravity sequences in 23-second bursts and rebuilding mission control piece by piece with authentic NASA equipment. Howard pushed himself past the boundaries of human endurance, working 18-hour days for months on end. Sleep became a luxury he felt he couldn't afford, and rest was viewed as a sign of weakness in a world that demanded total commitment. Then, in a moment that stripped away the illusion of his invincibility, his body finally shut down. The collapse on the set of Apollo 13 was a brutal awakening. Diagnosed with severe dehydration and dangerously high blood pressure, Ron was forced into a 36-hour pause that felt like an eternity for a man who believed the world revolved around his control. When he returned to the set, greeted by a crew wearing mission control shirts, in a show of silent solidarity, the emotional impact was profound. He realized he had crossed a line that nearly cost him everything, including his health and his ability to be present for his family. This wasn't just burnout. It was a confrontation with the reality that perfection is a hollow pursuit if it leaves the creator broken. This period of literal and figurative collapse is where the parallels with Rob Reiner become most haunting. Ron understood that directors like Reiner carried a similar invisible weight behind their public successes. Both men were driven by a relentless need to prove they belonged at the top, to show that they were more than the child stars the public remembered. But while Rob's drive was often expressed through bold external passion, Ron's was turned inward, fueling an internal grind that never powered down. The shocking news of Rob's sudden and violent end in Brentwood served as a terrifying reminder of how fragile that carefully constructed control truly is. It forced Ron to look back at his own mission control mentality and realize that no amount of preparation or success can shield a person from the sudden, chaotic turns of life. In the fifth act of this narrative, we turn to the most intimate and perhaps most painful chapter of Ron Howard's life, the profound bond with his younger brother Clint. To the rest of the world, Clint Howard is the prolific character actor with over 250 credits to his name, known for his unique presence in everything from Star Trek to Apollo 13. But to Ron, Clint is the only other person on the planet who truly understands what it felt like to grow up inside the golden cage of the Hollywood studio system. They were co-workers and witnesses to a childhood that required them to be earning paychecks and delivering professional-grade performances before they could even fully grasp the value of money. This shared history forged an unbreakable anchor, a brotherhood that served as Ron's only true grounding force when the pressures of fame threatened to pull him apart. However, the path of adulthood was far less gentle for Clint than it was for his older brother. As Ron's directing career began its meteoric rise in the 1980s, he had to watch from the sidelines as Clint spiraled into a dangerous battle with substance abuse. Ron has since described the terror of that period, admitting he felt powerless as he watched the person he loved most drift toward a breaking point. In 1990, Ron was forced to make the most agonizing decision of his life, drawing a hard line. Clint had to get help, or their relationship would be lost forever. Thankfully, Clint chose recovery, a turning point the brothers documented with raw honesty in their 2021 memoir, The Boys. But today, a new and different kind of fear has taken hold. While Ron has always been the man who can fix any problem on a film set, he is now facing a situation where he has zero control. Clint has been grappling with serious health challenges that have made it increasingly difficult for him to continue his lifelong passion for acting. Ron has expressed a profound sense of helplessness, a raw vulnerability that has stripped away decades of his emotional armor. For a man who built a $200 million legacy by shaping perfect endings, the realization that he cannot adjust the script for his brother's health has been devastating. This ongoing struggle with Clint's health is the lens through which Ron viewed the shocking news of the Rob Reiner tragedy. He was already living in a state of constant worry and reflection when the headlines broke in December 2025. The loss of Rob and his wife Michelle under such violent and senseless circumstances landed as a brutal reminder that even legends do not get extra time. For Ron, it reinforced a painful clarity. Achievements lose their luster when the people you love are slipping away. It is this deep-seated fear of losing his brother that has finally pushed Ron to step back from the grind of Hollywood, choosing to protect fleeting moments of presence over a lifetime of professional praise. In the sixth act of this narrative, we confront the stark, cold reality of the event that shattered Hollywood's collective sense of security and left Ron Howard reeling in a state of profound shock. On December 14, 2025, the silence of the Brentwood neighborhood was broken by a tragedy that felt like the stuff of Greek tragedy rather than modern life. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Reiner were found dead in their master bedroom, victims of multiple sharp force injuries, a detail that was later confirmed by the medical examiner to have occurred within minutes of the attack. The person who discovered the scene was their daughter Romy, who had gone to the house after a massage therapist reported being unable to enter the property. The details that emerged were almost impossible for the public, and specifically for Ron Howard to process. Police quickly identified the suspect as the Reiner's own son, Nick Reiner, who was arrested hours later near the University of Southern California campus. Nick, who had publicly struggled with addiction and homelessness for years, struggles that he and his father had even explored together in the semi-autobiographical film, Being Charlie, was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. This was not a peaceful passing at the end of a long celebrated life. It was a sudden, chaotic, and brutal termination of 2 people who had spent their lives advocating for decency and early childhood development. For Ron Howard, a man whose entire life and career had intersected with Rob's since the very beginning, stretching back to when Rob wrote the pilot script for Happy Days, this news landed like a physical blow. Howard, usually so controlled and professional, took to social media in the early hours of December 15th to post a tribute that was heavy with quiet pain. He described Rob as a superlative filmmaker and a dedicated citizen, But the subtext was much deeper. Sources close to Howard shared that he was shaken beyond words, haunted by the sheer senselessness of the act. He found himself replaying their shared history from the studio hallways of their youth to the competitive but respectful arena of high-stakes directing. This tragedy forced a confrontation with the unspoken truth that Ron had spent decades trying to ignore, that the industry's demand for perfection and public success offers no protection against the rawest forms of human tragedy. Watching the Reiner family's private pain become a global headline, Ron was reportedly haunted by the final moments of his friends. The contrast between Rob's final public reflections on the beauty of family and the violence of his end was unbearable. Already weakened by the health struggles of his brother Clint, Ron saw in the Reiner tragedy a terrifying reflection of life's fragility. It became the ultimate wake-up call, a sign that the order he believed the world followed was an illusion, and that no amount of legacy could ever be worth the risk of losing another moment with those who truly matter. In the final act of this somber reflection, we witness what can only be described as the great retreat of Ron Howard. At 71 years old, a man who once lived by the demands of a call sheet has finally staged a quiet revolution against the industry that raised him. The shocking, senseless end of Rob and Michelle Reiner acted as the final catalyst, stripping away any remaining desire Ron had to maintain the facade of the unstoppable director. He realized that for 5 decades he had been a master of telling the world stories, but in the process, he had allowed his own narrative to be written by studio deadlines and the relentless pursuit of perfection. This wasn't a choice made from a position of comfort, but one born from the raw clarity of grief and the terrifying reality of his brother Clint's health battle. Ron has recently admitted that the silence between his projects, which he once feared, has now become his sanctuary. He has begun the painful process of taking inventory, not of his awards or his box office records, but of the weeks and months lost to the grind. Standing at a bench he donated to John Burroughs High School, the very place where he first met his wife Cheryl, Ron shared a truth that stunned his peers. He would trade every accolade and every hit film to get back the time he missed with his children. This admission marks the end of the Opie persona and the reliable Richie archetype. It is the emergence of a man who recognizes that while a film legacy is etched in celluloid, a human legacy is written in the presence we provide to those we love. Today, Ron Howard's life no longer revolves around the high-stakes pressure of massive productions like Apollo 13 or the grueling reshoots of Cinderella Man. He has stepped back significantly from Imagine Entertainment, allowing the company to run with a newfound independence so that he can remain close to Clint and his family. He has started saying no to projects that require extended travel, understanding that the cost of being away is a price he is no longer willing to pay. This shift is his way of honoring the memory of Rob Reiner by refusing to let his own life end with the same unspoken competition and unresolved tension that haunts the history of Hollywood's elite. As we close this chapter on Memories of the Stars, we are left with a powerful reminder that transcends the boundaries of fame. The story of Ron Howard and Rob Reiner is a human one, a cautionary tale about the fragility of time and the illusion of control. It reminds us that even those who seem to have everything, the money, the fame, the respect of millions, still carry the heavy weight of regret. If this story has made you pause and reflect on your own priorities, perhaps that is the ultimate legacy these two icons leave behind. It is a call to slow down, to hold your people closer, and to remember that moments once gone can never be replaced.